Have you ever heard stories that feel like they've been stolen from an action movie? Well, today's story is one of those. And believe it or not, it's all true. A teenager, just 14 years old, has been on the FBI's most wanted list for 3 years. He went on a dangerous crime spree, which is kind of unusual for someone his age. He didn't just break into houses. He stole cars, boats, and even airplanes, all without a pilot's license. He racked up 67 crimes in a span of just 3 years. And in one daring moment, he even stole a police rifle. Even though the FBI chased him all over the place, he always slipped away. If you like these kinds of chilling stories, along with other crime and mystery tales told in story format, think about subscribing to my channel. Now, let's jump into today's story. This teenager we're talking about is Colton Harris Moore. His life was far from a fairy tale, marked by early hardships. Colton's mom battled alcoholism, making it tough for her to care for him. His dad had his own struggles with drugs. After their divorce, Colton and his mom ended up on a small island called Camano near Washington. They lived in a run-down trailer they found on the island, and poverty and neglect were part of their daily life due to his mom's drinking problem. To make ends meet, Colton turned to petty theft. He'd sneak into local stores and supermarkets to steal necessities like food and drinks. However, his lack of experience often got him caught, leading to time in juvenile detention centers. These places are like special schools for kids who break the law, not quite prisons, but far from comfort, more like supervised homes or schools. He was eventually released after some time. With his mother unable to provide much care, Colton didn't give up. At just 14, he became more adept at doing things he shouldn't. He started breaking into empty houses, sometimes by picking locks or breaking in. His primary goal was to find food and drinks in the fridge, then make himself at home, watching TV or playing video games. He preferred houses without occupants, especially those owned by vacationers, which were easy to spot on the island. These vacant homes gave Colton a brief escape from his troubles, making it feel like home, if only for a short while. Sometimes, if he found a house with a car outside, he'd take it for a ride, clean it up, and return it looking like new. He'd also steal things like money, gold ornaments, electronics, and even frozen food. Colton believed that the homeowners would recover their missing items through insurance, thinking he wasn't really causing harm. During this time, he distanced himself from his mother and started to carve out his own life, separate from hers. He would spend nights in the houses he sneaked into or set up tents in the woods. As he moved from place to place, his tent became a hideout for all the things he stole, including money, credit cards, food, and anything necessary for survival. He always had a strange list of things he wanted to steal and places to steal them, which included a fire station. He wanted a special camera used by firefighters to see people through walls, which would help him plan his break-ins more safely. After giving it thought, he decided against robbing the fire station and instead spent $6,000 on night vision goggles, using a stolen credit card to pay for it. As the months passed, Colton continued living in his forest hideout, moving around the island and breaking into homes. The police received numerous reports about these burglaries, and they worked tirelessly to catch him. Eventually, they identified him by matching fingerprints, photos from previous arrests, and the fact that he wasn't attending school or living at home with his mom. Yet, identifying him was just the beginning. Capturing him remained a mystery. They spread his picture all over town, declaring him wanted. Over time, news about Colton and his appearance spread throughout the island. However, the island was vast, with various areas and towns. Locating his whereabouts was a difficult task. While Colton's notoriety spread throughout the island, he stayed focused on gathering supplies. He used stolen credit cards to acquire tools, gadgets, and items essential for survival in the forest, such as sprays to keep bears and other wild animals away. This gave him the confidence to tackle the challenges of living in the woods. In 2007, when Colton was just 16, his spree of breaking into homes took a dramatic turn. He entered a house, but this time, the police showed up quickly thanks to vigilant neighbors who sensed something was wrong and made the call. He was arrested and sent back to a juvenile detention center again. During his time in detention, Colton maintained a different side of himself. He stayed away from trouble and concentrated on self-improvement. He spent his days reading books, honing his drawing skills, and developing a deep fascination with airplanes. He practically drew planes all day. He actively engaged in discussions and classes, giving the impression that he was genuinely committed to turning his life around. He appeared focused on following the prison rules and shared his ambitions with supervisors about returning to school, going to college, and aiming for a better life after his release. His good behavior earned him a transfer to a less secure facility. You might think that's a positive turn of events. Colton becoming a good citizen, problem solved. But with someone like Colton, you can never be sure of what's really going on in his mind. During his time in the new detention center, he carefully observed the guards and learned the ins and outs of the place. One night, he seized an opportunity to escape through a window, as the facility lacked proper security measures on the outside, making it relatively easy for him to run away. Colton was back in the wild again. Fast forward to 2008. At 17 years old, he had no choice but to revert to his old life. He set up camp deep in the forest and resumed his familiar activities, such as breaking into houses and stealing from stores. He gained mastery at climbing, breaking and entering, and staying stealthy. In one daring heist, he broke into a tool store through the second-floor window by jumping walls and managed to crack open the safe. With the police hot on his heels, Colton managed to escape. On one occasion, following a heist, he stole a Mercedes sports car and led the police on a high-speed chase. He knew the area like the back of his hand and zigzagged through roads before vanishing into the woods. The police found the car crashed into a tree, but Colton had disappeared. The police intensified their efforts, bringing in more officers, conducting widespread searches, deploying dogs, and helicopters. Despite their relentless pursuit, they couldn't track him down. The FBI eventually joined the hunt, offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. Meanwhile, Colton had big plans of his own. Remember his fascination with airplanes? That interest had grown during his time in prison. After escaping, he bought books on flying and a laptop to play Flight Simulator, a flight simulation game. He spent all his time playing that game to learn about flying, all with the dream of stealing an airplane and flying it by himself. After acquiring a wealth of knowledge about airplanes from books and games, Colton began secretly observing the small local airport on the island, where private planes were kept. He would hang around the airport and occasionally seize the opportunity to enter planes and snatch their instruction manuals, which he studied very carefully. He finally believed he had learned enough to fly a plane on his own. One fateful night, he decided to break into the airport. He tampered with the lock on the building where the planes were kept and examined each one closely. Selecting what he deemed the most suitable, he pulled it onto the runway. With the wisdom he had gained from his readings and gaming, he managed to start the plane and took off quite effortlessly. He moved into the sky, flying high above the clouds at around 18,000 feet to evade radar detection. However, he overlooked a critical detail. The plane had little fuel and was now running empty. He realized he needed to land safely, another challenge. Landing is one of the riskiest aspects of flying, and his options were limited. He had to crash the plane intentionally, but wanted to do so in a way that wouldn't seriously injure or kill him. He found an open area and directed the plane toward the ground. When it hit, it was like an explosion. Astonishingly, Colton survived with only minor scratches and bruises. Without delay, he exited the wrecked plane and vanished into the forest. The authorities, including the police and other officials, became aware of the stolen plane, but they couldn't believe it was stolen by Colton. They suspected it might be tied to individuals involved in illegal drugs, not a teenager like him. Colton became experienced at staying hidden and managed to elude the island's police. They searched tirelessly and eventually discovered his forest tent, seizing all his belongings. But he always stayed one step ahead, watching from a distance to ensure they couldn't locate him. The police began to entertain the idea that Colton might be the one who stole the airplane, especially since they found the stolen plane's manual in his tent. In the middle of all this excitement, Colton had a plan to go to another nearby island, which was part of Washington state. He stole another plane and managed to land it safely on the new island. While he was there, he found an ATM in a supermarket and a forklift truck used in warehouses. He used the forklift to break into the ATM and took the money. He later went to various places, leaving behind fingerprints and footage from security cameras. This convinced the police that Colton, the mad boy, was behind the airplane thefts. As Colton's name and pictures got more attention, he gathered a unique group of fans who called him the Barefoot Bandit because of how he often did his heists without shoes. People really liked his nickname, and they made fan pages, talked about him on YouTube, even wrote songs about him, and created graffiti art dedicated to him. Colton seemed to enjoy the attention and left his signature by drawing footstep marks on the floor of a supermarket during one of his thefts to show his fans he was there. Despite all that, living became difficult for Colton. He decided to get out of the second island because the police and the FBI were getting closer. They were watching the airports more closely. So this time, he decided to steal a boat. He found the key to the boat and sailed from the island to Canada without being seen by the Coast Guard, who watched over the water. He spent a few weeks in Canada and made 2 friends there. They didn't know who he really was. After a few days, they went their separate ways and later saw news about an American runaway. That's when they realized they had met the Barefoot Bandit. Believing the pressure had gone down, Colton stole another boat and returned to the United States. He continued stealing cars, but played it safe this time. He didn't stick with one car for too long and avoided gas stations because of their security cameras. Instead, he changed cars when they ran out of gas. He stuck to this plan until he reached a local airport in Idaho, not far from Washington state. There, he took another plane and flew it to Granite Falls in Washington state. When he got there, he spotted an empty piece of land and decided to land the plane there. But the ground was littered with tree stumps, making for a rough landing that damaged the plane. Luckily, Colton got away with just minor injuries and quickly disappeared into the nearby forest. This time, people were around and witnessed the plane crash, including a man chopping down trees. He went over to the plane and quickly informed the police. The FBI and special helicopter teams arrived without delay, initiating an aerial search. They marked off the area and set up checkpoints. Meanwhile, a local family spotted a suspicious person in the trees near their home and called the police. They rushed over and conducted a deep search, but they were unaware that Colton was hiding there. He slipped away, leaving behind his belongings, including a bag containing around $20,000 in cash and a camera with his selfies. Despite extensive efforts by the police, FBI, and special forces, they couldn't recapture him. Meanwhile, Colton stole another plane for the 5th time. This time, he flew to another island in Washington state, landing safely. After a few more thefts in the area, Colton decided to keep a low profile for several months. Some of his fans speculated that he might have met an unfortunate end or drowned at sea, as it was unusual for him to go quiet for so long. Colton took everyone by surprise by leaving a large footprint drawn at the harbor and stealing a boat, signaling his return. With the stolen boat, he voyaged to another island called Lopez Island. Subsequently, he stole another boat and returned to his home island, Camano Island. The residents of Camano Island had developed a strong dislike for him and held meetings to devise a plan for catching him. They even organized groups to patrol at night, all armed with weapons. Those who owned airplanes kept a watchful eye over their aircraft during the night. However, Colton had no intention of remaining on that island. As soon as he arrived, he stole a car and departed for another city. On his journey, he passed by an animal shelter and left an envelope with a message and a $100 bill in front of the store. The note read, "I passed by your place and I had some extra money. Please use it for animal care." It was signed by Colton, the Barefoot Bandit. He didn't even attempt to hide his location. This time, Colton wanted to explore more of the country. He continued moving from one state to another, stealing cars each time and using them until they ran out of gas. During his travels, he broke into several airports in different states, searching for the right airplane. Authorities had no clue about his whereabouts, even though he was journeying thousands of miles across America. Nobody had pinpointed his exact location. After traveling 9 different states and covering a distance of about 3,200 kilometers, stealing 11 cars along the way, Colton finally reached the airport in Bloomington, Indiana. He built a tent in the woods near the airport, patiently awaiting the opportunity to steal a plane. When that moment came, he came out from the woods, entered the plane, and took off. This was Colton's final flight, leading him south all the way to the Bahamas, an entirely different country. After Colton arrived in the Bahamas, some people noticed a plane flying around an area with no airport. Colton crash-landed the plane just like before, but this time, the ground was flat and muddy, so the landing went well. He left the plane and ran into the forest. Soon, the local police arrived and saw the plane with American tags, which made them suspicious. They contacted American authorities, and they were informed about Colton. So the Bahamians spread Colton's news on TV and in the newspapers. Later on, Colton stole a car and drove to a busy city on the island. Once he was there, he walked around and kept an eye on the harbor. He noticed a boat owner leaving his boat unattended. So he quietly followed the owner to his car, which was parked near a restaurant. He saw the boat key inside the car and didn't waste any time. He quickly broke into the car, grabbed the boat key, and hurried back to the harbor. He climbed onto the boat, started the engine, and sailed away. With this boat, he went to another island within the Bahamas called Oliveira. He hid among the trees for about a week, doing his best to stay out of everyone's sight. His name and face were all over the news, which made it difficult for him to move around. Sometimes he would walk by a restaurant and catch a glimpse of himself on the TV or see wanted posters of himself. To avoid being recognized, he would change his appearance and wear disguises. But after a while, he got tired of playing this game. So he decided to steal another boat and set sail from the harbor. He cruised around on the sea for a bit, and then did something quite unusual. At the harbor, there were 2 men standing on the pier. Colton wanted to show off his skills by maneuvering his boat with style. The 2 men were puzzled, wondering what this young boy was up to. Colton steered his boat closer to the pier and struck up a conversation with them and said, "You might not know me, but I am Colton, the Barefoot Bandit." After saying that, one of them immediately recognized him and was aware of the $10,000 reward for capturing him. However, he played it cool, intending to lure Colton closer for an arrest. So, Colton approached, telling the guy, "I know you've figured out who I am. No need to act like you don't. Call the police. I want to have a little fun with them." The man was seriously surprised by Colton's audacity. In the background, the other man secretly dialed a friend who had a boat, hoping to catch him. Colton noticed this and wasted no time. He skillfully steered his boat away. The 2 guys simply stood there, watching Colton's boat move further from the shore, and he seemed confident, almost daring them. A bit later, their friend returned with a group of buddies, making a total of 6 of them. They all boarded the boat and began pursuing Colton, who remained undaunted. As they closed in on him, one of the men brandished his firearm and aimed it at Colton. In a remarkable skill, Colton deftly maneuvered his boat to create a huge wave that splashed over them, leaving them soaked. The person steering their boat couldn't see properly due to the water in his eyes, causing him to lose control and veer off course. Colton seized the opportunity to escape and sped toward a nearby harbor. This harbor was situated just behind a luxurious house, guarded by a security officer who couldn't believe what he was witnessing. He observed one boat chasing another. One of them was occupied by a single individual, and the other carrying a group of people who were yelling and pursuing the lone boater. The security guard contemplated contacting the police, but then he saw Colton's boat rapidly approaching the harbor. He signaled for Colton to slow down, but Colton crashed the boat into the harbor and leaped off, sprinting toward the dock. The security guard struggled to catch his breath and asked Colton what was happening. Colton panted and explained that some individuals were trying to harm him. Then, he darted past the officer and vanished into the bushes, heading for the luxurious house he had spotted earlier. The security officer trailed closely behind as Colton sought refuge among the bushes around the house. The security officer promptly phoned the local police chief and informed him that he had spotted the boy from the news hiding in the garden of the house he was guarding, concealed by the bushes. The police chief wasted no time and alerted law enforcement in the area and at the harbor, leading them to encircle the location. Colton, determined not to give up, continued to stealthily navigate through the bushes, eventually making his way around the harbor from the opposite side. Silently, he slipped into the water while everyone searched above. He slowly swam to a boat and climbed on board. Meanwhile, a multitude of people, including the police, boat owners, and residents, had gathered at the harbor. They observed a boat moving quietly and slowly with dim lights prompting them to wonder what was happening. Colton was swiftly departing from the harbor. People began to realize that something was amiss and promptly notified the police. The police didn't have their boats ready, so some boat owners offered their boats to assist in the pursuit. The police hopped on the boats and gave chase, but Colton had gained a considerable lead. He frequently glanced back to gauge the proximity of the police. However, at one point, he became distracted, causing his boat to crash with a sandy part of the island that he had failed to notice earlier. The boat got stuck in the sand, and despite all his efforts to get it out of the sand, the propellers remained trapped, rendering the boat immobile. The police were closing in, pointing their firearms on Colton, demanding him to surrender. In a sudden turn of events, Colton pointed a gun he had at his own head, expressing his intent to shoot himself if they didn't keep their distance. The police urged him to lower the weapon, but he continued to cry out, "I can't go back." At the same time, with his other hand, Colton attempted to free the boat from the sand. In a swift maneuver, he spun around and maximized the boat's engine, somehow managing to move it from the sand. He then started to get away. At that moment, the police started opening fire, but they were not aiming at Colton. Their shots were directed at the boat's engine in an attempt to disable it. Fearing for his life, Colton stopped the boat, dropped his gun, placed his hands on his head, and shouted repeatedly, "I surrender." The police secured the boat, ensuring it couldn't move, and ordered Colton to raise his hands. They approached him and finally took him into custody, having complete control of the situation. After 2.5 years since his escape from prison, Colton was finally apprehended. A crowd gathered at the harbor, capturing the moment on cameras. Colton attempted to shield his face from the onlookers, avoiding having his picture taken. The Bahamian authorities achieved what the American police, the FBI, and special forces couldn't. Colton was transported by plane to face trial in the Bahamas. Interestingly, when the Bahamian authorities held him accountable for the thefts and crimes committed there, they only imposed a $300 fine because he had entered the country illegally. However, they wanted to transfer him to the US authorities, believing he would face much more severe charges and penalties there. Upon returning to American custody, Colton was required to wear white shoes, though the significance of this requirement remains unclear. In 2010, he went to trial in the United States at the age of 19, no longer considered a minor and to be tried like any other adult. He faced a total of 67 charges in 3 different countries: the United States, Canada, and the Bahamas. His potential sentence could have amounted to as much as 30 years or even more. Fortunately for Colton, he was assigned one of the best lawyers, John Henry Brown, to represent him. This lawyer was renowned for handling challenging criminal cases, including the infamous serial killer Ted Bundy's case. Rather than contesting all the charges against Colton, he persuaded Colton to confess to all of them. At the same time, he tried to make the judge and jury understand the challenging childhood Colton had been through and the hardships he had faced. His aim was to shed light on all the suffering Colton had experienced since his early years and the obstacles he had confronted. The judge eventually empathized with the challenges of Colton's life. Following discussions with the jury, they reached a decision to sentence Colton to 7 years. He didn't serve the entire 7 years and was granted parole after spending 5 years in prison. In 2016, at the age of 25, he was released. Interestingly, he secured a job working as an assistant in the office of the lawyer who had defended him. Finding employment was not easy due to his criminal record, making it a generous gesture on the lawyer's part. In interviews after his release, Colton expressed his strong desire to distance himself from the person he used to be and leave his past behind. He was focused on building a new life and seeking opportunities, such as giving talks and sharing his life experiences with others. This young man underwent one of the most remarkable and extraordinary teenage experiences in history. He stole houses, cars, boats, and even airplanes, robbed banks, and managed to escape from prison, all without causing harm to a single person in the process. Ultimately, the court recognized his challenging past and handed down a relatively fair sentence. That's the conclusion of Colton's story. If there's something you haven't done yet, it's subscribing to my channel. And when you go to school and you see the like button in class, invite him to join Colton to learn how to become a pilot in 3 days. Then, put him in an airplane, empty the fuel tank, and let him fly alone. Thanks for watching my first video. See you in my next.